So welcome back to the AI Journal podcast. Today we're joined by Amy Peck and we're looking at everything on XR, VR, the world of the Metaverse. We watched your talk earlier, absolutely incredible. Day 3 of Web Summit. Can you give us a bit of a background to who you are, Amy? What's your story? How did you come up with Endeavour XR? And what you do, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I jumped off into what I call the abyss of consulting after about 2 years at a company called Leap Motion, which was this tiny little peripheral that allowed you to control 3D assets on your laptop using just your hands. But our engineers, in their infinite wisdom, right when the Oculus DK1 came out, just duct taped it to the front of the DK1, and they strapped it on my head, and I could see my hands in this virtual environment. And I thought, this is amazing. And Leap Motion didn't really want to focus on enterprise, which is what I cared about.
Yeah.
So how did I start the company? Literally on my dining room table.
I love that. Wow. That's a great origin story. So walk us through it. What was that? You've touched on it briefly there. What was that process like going into a VR company, an XR company? How did it all come about? How did this idea, you touched on it, but where did you actually see it, Amy? Where did it come about?
Well, I was brought into Leap Motion by the investors because it was meant to be a consumer peripheral, but they thought, well, there's got to be an enterprise application for this. And it was once I had seen that combination of, really organic hand tracking in these virtual environments, and then at the same time talking with some of the largest companies in the world across every vertical. That's what was interesting to me, that it wasn't vertical specific. It's every time we put someone in the technology or we shared with them just the basics of what it could do, they just started rabbiting on about all the use cases for their specific specialty. And I thought, there's something here.
Yeah.
And everyone was focused on games, and I was like this lone, kind of sad, boring person going to like materials handling conference. Let me tell you, you have not lived until you've been to a materials handling conference. I'm just saying.
We'll not live then.
Well, yes,
we'll just
yeah,
not live.
I'm giving you some of your life back right now.
Thank
so
you.
that was a good pro tip. But yeah, and it was interesting because after a couple of years, and the gaming industry, it was still very much focused on gamers and really those who were early adopters. But then the industry kind of pivoted, and I talk about stumbling upward. I was just kind of standing there,
yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like this light sort of shone upon me, and it was the angels sang, and oh, there I was, and I just got very lucky.
That's a hell of a kitchen table.
Yeah.
Seriously, yeah, it was a very, very large table.
Where'd you buy that one from? We're getting that. Yeah. So what were the pieces that the companies were talking about from I call it a practical application for an enterprise? That were getting them excited and that showed you that there was a market and a product to be had and scaled?
I think initially everyone's first reaction was around training. And so if you look at healthcare, there were all manner of ways, because they look at 3D data, but it's very, very difficult to look at patient scans. If you look at the way X-rays are, they usually have sort of slices with a DICOM, and then they put them all up. But now they could actually import that entire scan and look at it, explode it. They could even practice the procedure, then show that procedure to the patient so they really understand what's going to happen to them. So what I started to see was this kind of not just, it's going to solve one particular problem for one particular specialty, but there's really this economy of scale that it had touch points across multiple business units. I saw that in heavy industry, so being able to obviously train for things that are very dangerous and hard to train on, or equipment that you just don't have access to that much. And then this evolution has now gone from improving process, and I used to joke that I'd bet my fee that they would see double-digit improvement in whatever the outcome was going to be.
Yeah.
Thankfully, to date, I have not had to give up my fee because it's really that good, and I think that technology has to be that good to be able to interrupt people's workflow.
Absolutely.
You have to have a really compelling reason, and yeah, so that's kind of how I had the circuitous journey to where I am today.
And who have you seen then? If you take the companies that you've worked with or seen something in the industry, where has been the best or one of the best applications to date where all those angels chorus together at the end of your kitchen table and what have you seen?
Well, I do think education, but one experiment that was conducted in some in London and some in Spain was around children on the spectrum, and being able to kind of allow them to learn, especially children who are afflicted with Asperger's, because they have a hard time reading interpersonal cues from other people. But they've noticed something really interesting, which was that they could be in these virtual environments, and the children kind of intellectually knew that they were talking to avatars, and so they were able to make eye contact, which they have a really hard time with in real life. And so the net was kind of changing the outcome of their childhood.
Yeah, that's a weird one.
Because they're able to teach them how to interact with people.
Yeah.
And
Better communication.
And if they just have a little bit better experience as a child, where they're, children are kind of mean. I mean, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
We don't know any better. And then just if it improves that outcome, imagine how much better and how that will affect their entire lives. And then if you sort of extrapolate that into an education system that lives in virtual environments, that actually the book Ready Player One talks about, but the film really didn't. Imagine an entire generation of children who grow up knowing, just learning with children from around the world, where they get to experience other culture, but not politics, right? Because they're not bringing their politics in because they're too young.
Yeah.
What would the impact be? And those are the kinds of things that I find really exciting about what the opportunity is for the technology.
Yeah.
Gosh, no one left behind. That's that would be such an amazing thing.
Yeah. And we always look at it as well. You said a thing that just touched on a real point to my heart, Amy, which is looking at it from the training purposes and the training and education, which is why the AI journal exists. But you look at it from, if you can connect these school kids to people on a global scale and don't leave it to when they get to 20 or 30 or 40 in a business environment, like you said, those skills are going to stay so ingrained in them, and I just think that's awesome to have that kind of way. So off the back of that, I'd love to ask you, Metaverse is being talked around a lot at the moment. We've had some big announcements, Facebook, we've had other companies now showing that they're delving into it. Nike, I saw a Wall Street Journal article saying about what they're doing in the Metaverse. Where do you, from a top level view and what you're doing, where do you see it going and how do you see it helping? You touched on training, but what are the kind of key things you're thinking when we sit back this time next year? What do you think is going to happen in the next 12 months, Amy?
Well, there's what I think is going to happen, and there's what I hope is going to happen.
Yeah,
Those are two different things.
Two key questions.
Today they are. But I think what's going to happen is I think a lot of companies are going to steam in and try and carve out their corner. And I think it's important, and I think it's great that Facebook is willing to invest this amount of money to Zuckerberg has basically kind of given us a place on the map now. But we know that there are some challenges in terms of data, and what we don't want to become are virtual lab rats. And and this could be a real problem. He's saying we want to have an open and accessible metaverse. We'll see if that happens. But I think any company that's looking at it, the 1.0 version is, yes, build your space and think about the experience that you want your customers to have. NFTs are equally in this terrible hype cycle. And I really want to know who decided fungible was the word that we were going to use for kind of irrevocable. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, this is like a terrible word, right? Fungible. It doesn't even sound good.
It's like democracy for IT.
It's just but anyway, that was a bad meeting, but now it's stuck. But NFTs, there's a bigger promise for NFTs, and there's actually a bigger promise, not in how they interact with their customer today, but actually building a one-to-one, completely transparent relationship with their consumer. Ask nicely for their data, and then give value in return for that data. And so I guess this leads into what I would like to see happen is that we evolve the metaverse into not just a mirror world, but really a completely different construct. And I think the first thing that we can look at is what defines value, and that we have this opportunity for value to be defined by a number of different things. Like I might sell my good or service to one person based on their ability to pay, or based on what matters to me in terms of their contribution to the world, because just the pure economics of it don't have to mirror the economic construct of the outside world. And so I'd like to see much more of that, a much more transparent exchange of data for value, and for us to be able to monetize our own data.
Yeah.
So if you look at this at the moment, it is going to be a bit, either you can call it Wild Wild West or Gartner hype curve or whatever else. if companies are listening in and they're thinking of investing in this space and they're thinking of finding a partner, what should they avoid, and then what should they look for as well? Because I guarantee, like most tech, a lot of people are going to be very disappointed in the first winter of this before they hit pay dirt and the angels sing for them.
Yes, you touched on something that is very near and dear to my heart, and without sounding kind of negative about it, I think you have to, whenever the new technology comes out, and it happened with XR and AR, there's a lot of people that just see an opportunity and they plant a flag in the ground. I would urge anyone who is looking for a partner, whether it be a development firm or whether it be a consultant, look at their background. Look also whether they're talking about themselves all the time, or whether whether they're just self-promoting, or whether they actually have a point of view and a perspective, and really a future vision of what this technology can be. And I think for companies, also have a bigger vision. Like, don't just go steaming in. My concern with NFTs, and again the Wild West, is that I think there will be a backlash, because if it's just going in and it's this sort of money grab opportunity, I think that will have a very negative impact on brands over the next several months. And the other danger is they are not going to see the ROI that they think they are, and then the purse strings shut. So it is bad for the industry as well. So I think we have to go in eyes wide open, and again, it has to be about the user experience. Like, what do you want your customer to experience? Commerce will come. Believe me, this is going to be 10x the economy of the real world. Don't worry about it. It's all coming. Think about customer experience. Think about transparent data, and think about how you're going to solve some real problems. Like, let's open source some AI algorithms that on some of the bigger issues that we're facing in the world. Not just the digital divide, not just global warming, but let's use technology to solve, as opposed to this digital land grab.
You touched on so many great points, Amy, like looking at it from storytelling. So we always look at it from not over being a hard sell, but also when people want to look at it as well, of actually painting a picture of where they want to go, or a vision or a story. Because we see it so many times where a company implements some sexy new technology, and then they're like, well, we don't actually know what we want to do with it or how we want to get there. How important would you say it is with VR and XR, and now it's kind of become a bit more normalized to talk around it and people really want to get engaged with it? How important would you say the communication is behind it, and making sure that you're getting the right messages out? Because personally, there's been some examples, not naming any names, where they didn't do it too well around the data security side, something we've mentioned. How important would you say that side is to it, to make sure that the message sticks with the user experience and the users and what it can actually deliver?
Well, I love that you said storytelling, because I think that, it's just doing like banner ads in in VR. It's just so horrifying.
Buy our product right in front of you.
Oh my gosh, that would be the worst possible use case. And I think that, again, it's this notion that we can also move to this everyone as an influencer, not about kind of rising above, right, and being this, it's like me, but just like, oh wow, I love the shirt you're wearing. I'm gonna make a little quick note about it. The brand is actually going to give you a microtransaction automatically. It doesn't have to be 17 levels, that it's this like grand pyramid scheme, right? But just like if you directly impact a sale because it's a product that you like, and then I see you interacting in the world, and I get it. I want to buy that for my son. I can see that kind of a construct being really interesting. But the storytelling piece, think about, I always use the example of a Game of Thrones, right? And you can do this as a brand story too. But I mean, if you take the entire series of Game of Thrones, and it just happens in real time, and instead of a director giving you this linear story about what happens in what order, what if you just created the world and you let people explore and follow the characters that they wanted to carry? It's much more like a game construct, and then they could record their version of how they saw the story. The director or the producer, whoever, could say, oh, this is what my intent was. And then you could have these multiple kind of storylines, and people start to really then become part of the story, or they experience it in a different way. And I think brands should do the same thing, right? Absolutely. Take someone on a journey, but give them agency. And then let them interact with your product in a way that isn't preachy, or taking their data and then manipulating them into thinking they need it to be happy, because they don't.
That goes back to your value and then the co-creation bit. So if organizations are listening in, Amy, and they're turning around and going, right, I'm now sold on this idea, the concept, the rethinking, the reimagination of the value chain and what we do, how would you recommend they get started? Apart from what we said a moment ago, is find someone reputable to get started with. But what should they do to learn those initial lessons that sometimes can be blinking painful as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that there's this, there's this urgency, right? But it's false. The metaverse isn't really even built yet.
Yeah.
Don't say that.
It is,
You've just destroyed a whole conference.
it is going to be an everlasting evolution, and it's not just going to be a purely digital environment. It is going to be this blending of the physical and digital. Hopefully not the way it was presented in hyperreality. I don't know if you've seen that video, which is frightening, but that we will have filters and levers to be able to see what we want to see when. But be thoughtful about going in. Like, don't just steam in and feel like you have to build your corner of the metaverse. But when you do, it should be open and accessible. It should be interoperable, and you should be able to pick it up on your phone and then go to your laptop and then go into maybe even a physical manifestation of it, and then go into VR or even AR. And you should be able to move kind of seamlessly through all of them. And there should be ways for you to have your avatar kind of be a portable identity that would move from one experience to another.
Yeah.
And we all have to think about how to do that.
Yeah.
And it's going to follow somewhat from a technology standpoint. Like, we have some network standards, right? So we can piggyback on those standards that have already been built in the way that we construct the metaverse. But it should really just be this kind of massive, growing, beautiful digital layer that we can come in and out of at will.
Yeah, I love it. It's going to be such a cool era, isn't it? So it's in its infancy. Like, people come to us and they say, well, what's going to happen with AI in 10 years? I'm like, well, it's still in its infancy. Like, what we're actually going to achieve with it, how we're going to apply it. And we were, I was testing out the Google Glasses. They kindly sent me a pair to review and do a whole video on it. And it's back to your point. You could just start picturing and seeing, and as soon as I had that, I just knew what I could do with it. And I was thinking, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, and my head just started exploding. It's an incredible area, and I feel like we could touch on so much more. But where can people find you, Amy? What can they find out about you? What's got going on at the moment?
Well, I'm most active probably on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best place to reach me, as long as you're not selling me offshore development services or lead gen services. I'm sorry to say that, but that's about 90% of my mail these days.
It's a nightmare, isn't it?
It's a little tricky. It's tricky for me to find the people I want to talk to.
Imagine what they were doing when they have VR. They were coming to you through a VR screen trying to sell. That would be an interesting picture, won't it?
Exactly. But we have a really, really horrible website that I actually built on that same dining table, but it's getting updated, so that will be endeavorxr.com.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to now make it my mission to get it updated before this goes out, so I'm not just horrified by it. I do many, many, many things well. Building websites is not one of them.
Yeah.
So, but I did my best.
Well, you got to start somewhere, so
Exactly.
That's the best thing. You can't go somewhere you want to be unless you start. So I love it. And really want to say thank you, Amy, for joining us on the podcast today. One of our favourite topics, XR, VR, AR. I'm obsessed with it personally, and I've learned a lot just in this short time with you. So really appreciate you joining.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you very much indeed.